Thank you for listening to the show on Really Big Something Channel. October 12th, 2017.
105 here on the great WRKO, 617-266-6868. If you want to be part of the show, okay, joining us now. He normally does on Friday. However, he has other obligations. He's been kind enough to join us today. Is none other than former UN ambassador, Fox News analyst, and really in some ways informal advisor to President Trump, John Bolton. Ambassador, thank you so much for coming on the Kuhner Report.
Well, glad to be with you. Thanks for making it work on Thursday, and sorry about tomorrow. I'll be on an airplane all day.
No, are you on? You're not on your way to like Pyongyang or Seoul or anything, are you?
No, I'm in the far west of the United States today, flying back tomorrow.
Okay, Ambassador, I obviously want to ask you about North Korea, but I want to ask you a question beforehand, and I'm really being serious. I mean, I'm going to say it tongue-in-cheek, but I'm really serious. I saw Sean Hannity. I don't know if you saw it last night, his interview with Trump. You were mentioned. When you were mentioned, crowd went crazy. When they talked about North Korea, Trump again referenced how much he respects advice and what people like you are saying. And I've just got to ask you this. Why have you not been given, or will you be taking a senior position within the Trump administration, whether it be at the State Department or the National Security Council? Because it seems to me now, with him on the verge of decertifying the Iran deal, possible war in North Korea, he could really use a guy like you talking in his ear day after day. Am I wrong?
You're flattering, which is always a good way to be, I suppose. Look, I haven't been offered anything. As you and I have discussed before, it's an honor anytime you're asked to serve our country. Whatever I can do as a private citizen, I'm going to keep on doing. Being on your show is a big part of it because of the voters and citizens that you reach. But I've gotten to the point where I don't sit around waiting for the phone to ring. I just keep banging away on the issues. We'll see what happens. Nobody should misunderstand, however, that the United States faces a lot of threats around the world, and the bureaucracy in Washington, whether it's the State Department or the military or the intelligence community, in many respects is still following Obama administration policies. Not the president, but the bureaucracies. And getting control of those bureaucracies is key for any president. It's especially true for Republican presidents and even more true for President Trump.
Ambassador, North Korea. The president yesterday, now maybe you interpreted it differently than I did, but when Hannity specifically asked him, are we heading towards war with North Korea, I thought his answer was very interesting. He said, I'm not saying we are, I'm not saying we're not. I'm not going to say anything. In other words, he didn't nix it. He didn't shoot the idea down. You now have General Mattis telling the U.S. Army to get ready for all possible contingencies. You have Kim Jong-un coming, or at least Pyongyang, coming out and saying that Trump has lit the wick of war. Are we slowly now sliding towards a possible military conflict, either a strike, a preemptive strike, or some kind of a confrontation with North Korea?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say we're sliding toward anything. In other words, not to misinterpret your question, but I think the president's decisions here and the course he's been following has been very deliberate. And nobody wants to see military action on the peninsula. But equally, what the president said in his speech to the UN General Assembly 3 weeks ago was very clear when he said, respecting North Korea, that denuclearization is the only way forward, meaning you cannot leave North Korea in possession of a nuclear weapons program. And the reason for that is not only do they constitute a threat to the United States, a bizarre, strange regime that we would be held hostage to as far as the eye can see, but the North Koreans, being a desperately poor country, I think are also prepared to sell nuclear weapons, nuclear materials, nuclear technology, ballistic missile components and technology to anybody with hard currency, other rogue states, terrorist groups. So this is they are a threat beyond Northeast Asia. Obviously, they're threatening the capability of hitting targets all across the continental United States. But they're a global threat, too, if, in fact, they were to go ahead, as I think they are, cooperating with Iran, for example, on its nuclear weapons program. So after 25 years of failed diplomacy, there aren't a lot of diplomatic alternatives left. And so any American president who agrees with what I think is the overwhelming view of the American public, which is we don't want these people in North Korea or Iran, I might say, to have a nuclear weapons capability, you've got to look seriously at the military option. Now, that said, I still think we're a long way away from it. We haven't seen any withdrawal of civilian dependent American personnel from South Korea. We haven't seen travel warnings. We haven't seen significant deployment of American forces for what might be necessarily an extended effort, not just to take out the nuclear sites, but to prevent North Korea from retaliating against the innocent civilians in our ally South Korea. So I don't think anybody should think this is going to happen tomorrow. We will see it coming. It's one of the problems with even the military option. There's no strategic surprise left. The best we can hope for is tactical surprise, and to protect our own people, Japan, South Korea, we'd see ourselves limited in what we can do there.
Ambassador, the BBC broke a story earlier this week citing officials within South Korea and the Defense Ministry that North Korea had allegedly hacked the war plans, the South Korean-U.S. war plans. Do you believe the story, A, and B, how big of a deal is it?
I believe they may have gotten some of it. I know our Defense Department denied it, but, North Korea has one of the world's most active cyber warfare campaigns going. Remember the Sony Pictures hack from North Korea, and I'm sure many others that we just don't know about publicly. Now, that said, the situation on the Korean Peninsula is a very narrowly defined geographical area. We've been in this position for 70 years. The plans that people have talked about, and much of which has been discussed in public, involve what would happen if either North Korea invaded South Korea, which perfectly appropriate to plan for the defense of South Korea against that contingency, or against the contingency of regime collapse in North Korea, and what we would need to do, along with South Korea, to get hold of North Korea's nukes and chemical and biological weapons before they got out to terrorist groups. In fact, I think most military experts would tell you that the strategy on both sides is limited by the geographical reality that we face on the peninsula. So I'm not sure there are a lot of surprises. It's a sad fact that North Korea has an extensive intelligence operation inside South Korea. It could well have been they'd gotten somebody into the South Korean highest levels of their military command or something like that. So there's a lot of espionage going on. Whether or not this claim of a hack is real or not, I think fortunately, even if it's true, it probably won't make that much difference. That's the best estimate I could give.
That's interesting. So, Ambassador, what you're saying is, because, as you point out, where North Korea is located, its geographic situation, that we've been there for so long, we know them, they know us, that if we were to attack, they pretty much know what we would do, and we would pretty much know what their response would be, correct?
Right, and vice versa. If they were to attack, there are just certain geographical funnels, our military calls them, because of the topography, where the roads are, where the valleys are, what the entry points into South Korea are, that people have thought for years that's how North Korea would come in. And honestly, for us and the South Koreans to get to Pyongyang, although we have greater capabilities, and let's not forget Douglas MacArthur's famous behind-the-lines landing at Incheon that saved us during the Korean War, we have more variations. We've still got to get some of the clear objectives, for example, taking Pyongyang, the North Korean capital, if we went in. So hopefully we're always more creative than they are, but much of the basic question really is decided by the geography.
Ambassador, we're up against time, and I do want to get one more question in, which is Iran. The president now is expected, according to what everybody's reporting, sometime in the next few days, whenever, to decertify the Iran deal. And I think don't get me wrong, I think it's a horrible deal. I think it's a disastrous deal. But by decertifying it, all it really does, correct me if I'm wrong, is punt the issue to Congress. and they're going to have to decide whether to reimpose sanctions. Are we staring now at a possible Obamacare redux in this sense that they vowed to get rid of the Iran deal on the campaign trail, but now when actually offered the opportunity to impose sanctions, they're going to blink like they blinked on Obamacare?
Yeah, I hear the same thing about what the president will announce probably tomorrow morning. I'm very worried about it, frankly. I think he's been given bad advice, I would say deceptive advice by the people around him. I think if you believe this deal is as bad as the president clearly does, last night on Hannity called it horrible. He's called it an embarrassment, the worst deal we've ever negotiated. How can you explain even to yourself that you'd say that about the deal and then stay in it? Decertifying is simply a reaction to the Corker-Cardin legislation. But what the president would basically say is this deal's not in America's interest. Now, if you think the deal's not in America's interest, if you think it's horrible, the clean break that should be made is get out of the deal. Present the Europeans and Iran with new realities, and try and go from there. I'm very worried that's not going to happen. This is going to cause a split within conservatives and the Republican Party. I just wish, going back to your first question, I wish I could have talked to the president about this. I'm not saying I could have changed his mind, but it would have been a different kind of voice than he's been hearing the past 3 months.
Ambassador, I know we're really, really up against it, but Iran has now vowed that even if the deal is simply decertified, as you point out, it just basically now Congress will have to deliberate on whether to impose or reimpose or not reimpose sanctions. For them, that's already crossing a line. And they say that there will be a, quote, tough response. Are you worried about what Iran will do in the region, in Iraq, across the Middle East, in response to a decertification?
Look, I don't want to sound callous about our people in the region, about Israel, about our allies, but it's hard to believe Iran can be any worse than they already are. And if they tried it, it would reveal the character of the regime, and it would reveal really why we should have gotten out of the nuclear deal once and for all in the president's speech tomorrow. So if they tried some kind of retaliation, I'm going to be right back on the same old stand anyway, arguing for withdrawal from the deal. This would just up the argument considerably, in my view. I don't trust the regime of the Ayatollahs. I think they're still pursuing nuclear weapons. I think they're still the world's central banker of international terrorism. I wouldn't leave them with a spare electron as far as the nuclear side goes. And I'd do everything I could to overthrow that regime and give it back to the Iranian people. They're dangerous to us, dangerous to Israel, dangerous to our Arab friends. And temporizing by simply decertifying and not withdrawing from the nuclear deal, I am sad to say would be a big mistake for the president, based, I think, on this very, very biased, incorrect, deceptive advice he's been getting.
Ambassador, I don't want to put you on the spot, but when you say he's been getting bad advice, are you referring to, I don't know, H.R. McMaster? Are you referring to his national security team?
I think the whole team has been giving him bad advice. We've heard testimony from some of them. They think the deal's in America's national interest. I think this is stunningly incorrect. And what I'm afraid we're going to have after the speech tomorrow, decertification or not, is we're going to have a continuation of the Obama policy, which is, I think, gravely wrong for our country.
We have been talking with former UN ambassador, Fox News analyst, John Bolton. Ambassador, have a safe trip back. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll be there next week. Thanks again.
God bless you. 617-266-6868. Okay. Trump now takes on the fake news media. He says their broadcast licenses should be revoked. Is he right? Or is this an infringement and assault on the First Amendment and the freedom of the press? That story, discussion, next.
Fake news.
123 here on the great WRKO. Okay, President Trump now goes for the jugular. He is now challenging the mainstream media's FCC licenses. As you know, NBC, ABC, CBS, the big networks. We're not talking about CNN now or MSNBC or cable networks, but the big broadcast networks have to have a license. that is renewed it's staggered over multiple years, but it has to be renewed. And Trump now is saying it is time to revoke their broadcast licenses. Why? Because now of the torrent, the massive flow, the ceaseless, incessant flow of fake news stories. And in particular, he is extremely angry with NBC for publishing what are to me two obviously bogus stories. One is the claim that Rex Tillerson, in a meeting, referred to President Trump as a blank moron. Not only did Rex Tillerson deny it, but the people that were allegedly mentioned in the piece who had to call Rex Tillerson and apparently talk him out of resigning, whether it be General Kelly, Mike Pence, General Mattis, all of them on the record said that never happened. We never called Tillerson. We never discussed him resigning. We never discussed the moron comment. It never happened. It's completely made up. And then NBC has now claimed that Trump, listen to this, for no reason whatsoever, wants to increase the nuclear arsenal, quote unquote, tenfold. Just like that he's such a warmonger who so wants to blow up the world in some kind of a nuclear holocaust that he's pressing his national security team on why we can't just increase our massive nuclear arsenal 10 times over. And as Trump has put it, that story is completely and utterly made up. Just out of whole cloth, made up. Now, in both stories, there's nobody on the record. In both stories, NBC News is citing, quote unquote, anonymous sources. Anonymous sources who they attribute certain quotes to, but they're not even characterizing their anonymous sources. So, they now appear to have caught, to me, I think there's no question about it, openly not just slanting the news, not just twisting, distorting the news, but literally making it up. They've now gone from media to out and out propaganda. And President Trump says, enough is enough. Roll it, Brittany.
You want to increase the nuclear arsenal?
No, I never discussed increasing it. I want it in perfect shape. That was just fake news by NBC, which gives a lot of fake news lately. No, I never discussed. I think somebody said I want 10 times the nuclear weapons that we have right now. Right now we have so many nuclear weapons. I want them in perfect condition, perfect shape. That's the only thing I've ever discussed. General Mattis put out a statement, or is putting out a statement, saying that that was fake news, that it was just mentioned that way. And it's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write. And people should look into it. No, I want to have absolutely perfectly maintained, which we are in the process of doing, nuclear force. But when they said I want 10 times what we have right now, it's totally unnecessary, believe me.
They're lying. I mean, they're lying. He wants to he wants to modernize our nuclear forces, our nuclear arsenal, as he puts it, makes them as technologically up to date. But it never happened. In fact, you have everybody. No, this never happened. Like you had everybody across the administration. Like you don't understand something. It never happened. So, look, nobody. I'm a journalist. I do this for a living. I'm behind the microphone. I'm going after powers that be all the time. You know that. You listen to this show. I've got enemies in the city, in the Democratic Party, like you wouldn't believe. Okay? Frankly, among the Republicans, the rhinos, you wouldn't believe. So nobody values freedom of the press more than Jeff Kuhner. Nobody values the First Amendment more than Jeff Kuhner. But it's one thing to be a journalist, even a journalist with an agenda, a biased journalist, a hack journalist, a journalist who, for whatever reason, substitutes ideology for objectivity. Okay, but at least there's a kernel of truth. When you start going to literally making stuff up, that's not journalism anymore. That's propaganda. That's fantasy. That's creative writing. And to do it because you want to bring this president down. So you're creating a false narrative of a rift between him and the Secretary of State when none exists, to try to paint chaos within the White House. When you're talking about him wanting a nuclear weapon, a nuclear arsenal 10 times, tenfold, you're just trying to portray him as some kind of a madman who wants to unleash a massive nuclear war. To paint him as unstable, unhinged, so you can have him removed from office. Well, now you're no longer acting as media. Now you're no longer acting as a journalist. Now this is out-and-out propaganda. And so the question is, should their broadcast licenses be revoked? And furthermore, we do have libel laws in this country, but it is almost impossible to successfully prosecute a media outlet no matter how false the story is, because you have to prove intent. So the libel laws are almost meaningless in America. But in most other, in fact, in all other democracies, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, Britain, Ireland, you could run Western Europe, they have good, strong libel laws on the books to rein in the media, to check this abuse of power. So they can't just make stuff up and get away with it. Is it time now for us to have real, serious libel laws and check the press? Is it time for their broadcast licenses to be revoked? 617-266-6868 is the number. More on this story, your calls and reaction next. Brittany, let's take it to Evan Heydrich in the news.
General Mattis put out a statement, or is putting out a statement, saying that that was fake news, that it was just mentioned that way, and it's frankly disgusting the way the press is able to write whatever they want to write.
137 here on the great WRKO. Okay, my friends, there is now a huge showdown brewing between Trump and the fake news media in the wake now of some scurrilous stories, utterly bogus, completely made up. There's no question about it. Before I get to that, my friends, guess what? It's time to open the WRKO box office. Be the sixth caller right now, 617-266-6868, to win a pair of tickets to see Frank Caliendo this Saturday at the Wilbur Theater. That's the sixth caller right now. Caliendo, Frank Caliendo, this Saturday at the Wilbur Theater. Call now, 617-266-6868. The sixth caller, you'll win a pair of tickets to see him this Saturday at the Wilbur Theater. Okay, like I was saying, Trump now obviously disgusted by the lies being peddled in the mainstream media, and they are lies. And so let me ask you this question. It's an obvious question. Do journalists have the right to lie? I'm not talking distort, bias, slant, whatever, have their opinions kind of interject into their reportage. I'm not talking about that. In other words, you read a newspaper, say the Boston Globe or the New York Times. Okay, it's slanted, it's very heavily liberal, you get it. Or the Wall Street Journal, which is very pro-Republican. Okay, you get it. But I'm talking now, you make it up. You say that Tillerson called him a moron when he didn't call him a moron. You can't get anybody on the record. You can't even get a source to be identified as an anonymous source. In other words, the source was in the room when this was said. Okay, then you can at least nail it down a little bit. Literally just saying anonymous sources, according to anonymous sources, according to officials, just officials. He called him a moron. And everybody that's mentioned in the story literally says didn't happen. Or take the most egregious of all of them, this one now, that Trump called for a tenfold, maximum tenfold increase in our nuclear arsenal, to paint him as a madman, as a warmonger, as a guy who wants a nuclear war, and we're all going to die under his watch, which literally did not happen. And again, you're citing bogus anonymous stories. Sorry, bogus anonymous sources to push bogus stories. I mean, can the media just get away with just making stuff up? And by the way, with the intent, it's not an honest mistake where whatever, you misreported something. The intent is obvious. It's to politically destroy Trump. Or whatever the person is. It's there for political motives, political goals, to implement a political agenda. Should the media not be held accountable? And so what Trump is now asking is, should these broadcast licenses be revoked from the big networks, NBC, CBS, ABC? He can't do anything about cable network like CNN or MSNBC, but he's saying maybe for these other networks. Now, my position is this. I don't think, they even have the authority to do that. This is part of the Federal Communications Commission. It's going to be very hard, even if they want to do something like this, to do it, to be candid. Number one. Number two, look, I'm a libertarian at heart. You don't like something, you turn the dial. You don't like something on TV, you turn the channel. You don't like what's being written in a paper, you don't buy it, subscribe to it, or read it on the internet. And eventually, their reputation will bring them down because people will just ignore it, revenue will dry up, viewers or readers or listeners or whatever will turn away, and eventually you go bankrupt. So I don't like the government getting involved in terms of, I'll give you a license, I won't give you a license. I don't like that. But let me tell you something that I've been advocating for many years, and this is somebody who's been a journalist, and like I told you, the First Amendment, that's my currency. That's my bread and butter. I live and die off the First Amendment. I'm sorry, but freedom of the press doesn't mean the freedom to libel people. Freedom of the press doesn't mean you can engage in utter propaganda and in utter smears without any consequences. And we are the only country in the civilized Western world that does not have serious libel laws on the books. And so, for example, here, I'll give you a classic example. If this story would never appear in England. Now, why would it not appear in England? Because you make up a story like this, they have a right to sue the newspaper. You then go to court, and eventually, the journalist would have to somehow show a certain amount of evidence for what the journalist is trying to allege. In this case, that Trump wanted to increase the nuclear arsenal by tenfold. Well, where's your evidence? Well, I can't reveal my sources. Fine. Don't give me the name. Give me the email that was sent to you. We don't want a name. Just give me a shred of evidence to prove that what you're saying is true. NBC can't do it. NBC wouldn't do it. And so, to prevent from being sued and losing millions and millions of dollars, or if the journalist says, no, I'm not going to reveal my sources, I'm going to go to prison, fine, go to prison. How much is it worth it for you to lie about a story? And so this is, to me, the best line of attack. I think it's high time, I've said this before and I'll say it again, that we have real serious libel laws here in the United States, and this would act as the greatest check and balance on our out-of-control media. Because I'm telling you right now, they're out of control. This is a rogue media. The only thing, think about what they've reported on him. Okay, just objectively, that we know to be false. Forget the nuclear arsenal. Forget being called a moron by his own Secretary of State. Okay, leave that off the table. That he went to a hotel in Russia, saw prostitutes, and was peed on, given golden showers by prostitutes in downtown Moscow, and that this was all filmed by the Russians, and that the Russians have this, and they're using it to blackmail them. And this story, even though it has been completely debunked, it is absolute garbage. It never happened. There's no evidence of it. There's none. No prostitute went on the record. There's no copy of the video. There's no copy of the audio. There's absolutely nothing. It didn't matter. They wanted to get that information out there, so they cited the dossier, as Maxine Waters would put it, the dossier, and they peddled it and peddled it and peddled it, whether it be the New York Times, whether it be the Boston Globe, whether it be the Washington Post, whether it be ABC, CBS, NBC, you name it. Now you tell me, where do I get my respect back? After you've smeared me, after you've libeled me, after you've lied about me, I never saw any prostitutes. Nobody peed on anybody. There's no video footage. There's nothing. And you guys are just making this up whole cloth? And there aren't any repercussions whatsoever? No. I can't do whatever I want on my job. You can't do whatever you want on your job. How come the media is given complete and utter license to literally say and do anything they want? And they hide press freedom, press freedom, press freedom. In other words, what NBC has become is a political shop. That's what it is. It's a propaganda political shop. And so is CBS, so is ABC, so is CNN, so is MSNBC, so is the New York Times, and I can run down the whole list. They just make it up. Well, if you've got some serious libel laws on the books, you know what? They can't make it up. Or if they do, they're going to pay a price. Agree, disagree, 617-266-6868 is the number. And let me just throw one more quick log on the fire. They lie about the president, NBC. Let's just take NBC now. Lie. Obviously lie, caught red-handed lying. Make it up. Completely make it up. They lie about him being called a moron. They lie about the dossier. They lie about the arsenal. But when they were given a story by Ronan Farrow, which had Harvey Weinstein on audio, he had the freaking audio of him groping a woman, when he had a story of 8 separate women, who each of whom testified in a video recording that Harvey Weinstein assaulted him and 3 of them said he raped him. When he had that story so freaking nailed down, you couldn't believe it. It's not fake news. It's what real news is, what real journalism is. NBC wanted to kill it. The New York Times killed it. So when they have real news about real scandals, about powerful liberal Democrats, they kill it. When they have utter garbage, smears, and libels against the sitting Republican president of the United States, make it up and just keep making it up. 617-266-6868. Let me ask you, should the broadcast networks' licenses be revoked? Is Trump right? And or should there be libel laws to keep the press in control? The fake news media. What needs to be done? What should be done? Your calls next. 153 here on the great WRKO. Let's go to John in New Hampshire. Thanks for holding. Go ahead, John.
Yes, Jeff, thanks for taking the call. I do think that the FCC can pull the license. Every year, the broadcasters, including your station, has to get a renewal based on public interest, and it doesn't seem like that they're fulfilling the public interest. They'll also still have freedom of the press. I mean, according to the Constitution, the freedom of the press is still there. They can certainly use the press. The FCC regulates the broadcast spectrum. And I think that's just basically taking a page right out of the musket argument from the Second Amendment as opposed to assault rifles. So if they want to go back to freedom of the press, that's guaranteed in the Constitution, but not necessarily broadcasting on the FCC licenses.
John, do you think their licenses should be revoked?
Well, I would think so. I mean, it seems like if they're making up bad stories about national security and, for that matter, world security, it seems like that's not serving the public interest at all.
John, thank you for that call. Look, it's even worse than that. To me, they're perpetrating a fraud. This is the thing. Look, if you're an accountant, right, you can't lie. You can't lie. You can't falsify the books. Right? There's many things in your profession. You literally, if you're lying on the job, you're out. You're out. In some cases, you could end up going to jail. So my question is this. I'm not talking about a factual inaccuracy. It happens. Mistakes happen. I'm not even talking about, they're slanting it this way. But the facts are there, or at least there's some facts there. I'm talking about what NBC is now doing, which is you're just making it up. The only thing they haven't done yet, and they may do it, is Trump sleeps with pigs. That's it. Bestiality. That's it. Really. Oh, he visited a farm, and according to anonymous sources, he went in the back with the goat there, and he had untoward relations with the goat. That's the only thing they haven't done yet. So, since when have journalists, quote unquote, become, what is this, like a priesthood? Since when, like politicians, are they always above the law? Why can they get away with utter impunity, things that an accountant couldn't get away with, a CEO of a company couldn't get away with? I could run down the whole list. You make stuff up, you're going to either go to jail or you're going to be fired. You lie. You deliberately lie for whatever the reason is. You're out on your rear end, or you could end up in prison, or you could be sued. So why not, at a minimum, forget if you want to get into the broadcast licenses, get libel laws and sue their rear end. Just sue the pants off of them. I'm sorry. How come they're never held accountable? And so this is why Trump is engaged in this verbal war with the media. Because if he wasn't calling them out, oh my God. They'd be going to town on this guy. So to me, it's fake news. And fake news is, in theory, a contradiction in terms. News is supposed to be real, factual, not fake. And if they're pushing fake, that means they're not in the news business. They're in the propaganda business. So then the First Amendment, freedom of the press, doesn't apply to you. It's for real journalists, not for propagandists. Dennis in Mansfield. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yes, enjoy your show. I don't get to listen to it that often, but I wanted to make the point. There was a movie that came out, I think it was in the 80s, early 90s, called Absence of Malice. It starred Valleyfield and Paul Newman. And basically, they destroyed Paul Newman's character because they wanted him to testify in a murder that his great-grandfather, I guess, was a mobster, whatever. And it really detailed, he went to the papers and he tried to get them to retract the story. He wanted to know their sources. Was going to take them to court, and they say you have to prove absence of malice. You have to prove that we were malice in, writing this.
Malicious intent, Dennis. It's called malicious intent.
Right.
In terms of the legal verbiage.
You can get a feel for what the press can do.
Well, Dennis, look, I worked in the media for 10 years, and I'm telling you, they can destroy somebody. And they can destroy somebody by just making stuff up. Literally making it up. And what they do now is, this is the technique, they hide behind so-called anonymous sources. Now, I'm going to be very candid with you. When I broke some big stories, I did use so-called anonymous sources. They didn't want to be named. They were whistleblowers. They wanted the information to be out there. But, the information was credible. I had evidence of the information. When I described my anonymous source, you almost knew who the person was, but you couldn't quite expose the person. So you give him a little bit of cover or protection, but you identify the source. You say, look, source very close to the president. A senior official within the State Department. So, okay, well, that's either Secretary of State or deputy. In other words, you can limit it to 3 or 4 people. And so, okay, but what you're seeing now, this is something radically different. This is just anonymous sources. Just sources say. Well, what? The cleaning lady said it? The guy who cleans the toilet said it? My friends, it's fake news, and it has to stop. The quicker, the better. Coming up next, Massachusetts does it again. Oh, my God. You're not going to believe this story. You're not going to believe it. Next.
The voice of Boston is you. 680 WRKO Boston, 93.7 WEEI HD2 Lawrence, Boston. It's 2 o'clock.